Welcome to 144,000 Teachers, the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. We invite you in the library of 144,000 Teachers to join us with the section number 5, where we have the biblical calendar for 2020-2030 in a PDF format that you can copy and you can even save in a USB. We recommend actually that you copy the monthly calendar for each year, which give you a good idea that the calendar can be actually followed, the biblical calendar, as it shows you the calendar for the Gregorian for that year as well as the biblical calendar. The purpose of this study is actually to show you when a year is a common year and embolismic year. So we will be explaining this more fully as we proceed with the study, more specifically in section number 6, using the moon phases for calculation and the moon fraction for observation. To do so, we need the data found in the official website of the United States government, the USNO, which is the United States Naval Observatory, using specifically the phases of the moon, dates of primary phases of the moon, and the fraction of the moon illuminated. As we present these two important phases of the moon and fraction of the moon illuminated, you will come to understand rules of correspondence, which will help you to understand again the common and the embolismic year. We also recommend Her Majesty Observatory Moon Watch program. It's called also Einstein program. And this is a very important study as well for observation. This is giving you 15 days in advance to the conjunction, the next new moon, and with diagram because it's observed. And we find that those diagrams are helpful for the visibility of the new moon crescent that we study as we prepare those calendars, which we need. This one, in case of, for purposes that we are using, is October 25th, 2022, which at this time of preparation of this video has not occurred yet. So this is basically the first diagram, a representation of the new moon conjunction, which is called the astronomical new moon, which you cannot see. You need a telescope to see, but in the sky, you don't see nothing. The moon is dark. So as we follow through, we see that the color there that they give, the color coding, is when you see a red moon, then you can start to see a visible crescent. And this is what we're interested at. This second diagram is for October 26, 2022. And you observe that it exhibits more shaded regions than those in the previous exhibit or the previous diagram. And this is showing now the crescent moon showing up. But this, we consider it the first visible crescent, which for our calculation, we do not use. We always use, like the Millerite and like the Hebrew, the horn crescent. It is a full visible moon in the west side. You have to look towards the west of the earth. And this is the diagram for October 27, 2022. And you can see it's totally, almost totally shaded, except for that little part here of all the continent of the earth. This is called the universal time. This is what we use. Everyone on the 27th of October 2022, if these diagrams are correct, because we cannot verify, we're not there yet. This is a helper. We can go 15 days in advance. They do not show them earlier than that. But you go to HMO, like we saw, Her Majesty Observatory, like we showed you, either the Einstein research program, and you can see that this is the majority of the earth that is able to observe the crescent moon then, which is the one we use, so that everyone can keep the same Sabbath, the same feast, and we are all on the same way of thinking. So you can see here in the Google search that we have the link which you may want to take note of. Now, as we are entering into a study of the biblical calendar having to do with the common and the embolismic year, we've got to start at the beginning. We've got to start with the Bible in the book of Genesis. In order to establish the biblical calendar, we will be needing day, week, month, and year. This is established in the Word of God. And the first part that we will be looking at is having to do with the light of the day and the darkness of the night. And this is how the Bible says it. God called the light day, the darkness he called night. The day is the morning and the night is the evening. And this represents from evening to morning to evening, the first, second, third, fourth, sixth, seventh day. So you have them all here, the 7th day of the week. Now, the 7th day of the week, the 7 days of the week, are also called the hebdomad. Hebdomad, which is a Latin and Greek word, which means simply 7. It's the group of 7. God established it at creation, and it remains so. It cannot be changed for any other number of 8 days or 10 days, like it has been attempted in history. The hebdomad is found in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Also, another important point that we will be establishing with the verses is that in Genesis chapter 7 and chapter 8, you will find the day, the week, the month, and the year also is established. So we also have, of course, the sanctuary calendar, where we will be looking at the book of Leviticus and the book of Numbers, and the sabbatical year and the Jubilee. So we have a lot of witnesses here to show you, and this, in fact, helps us to establish if a year is common or embolismic. So it is not complicated. It is what we call complex, meaning it has many parts, as you can see. But this is the way the Creator has created his wonderful calendar. So for us to see, because it is in the sky. We'll proceed now with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Verse 3, God said, let there be light, and there was light. Verse 4, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Verse 5, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And we know that this is repeated for 6 days. What is the Lord trying to say is that the day starts in the evening, which is the darkness, which is a full evening from darkness, and then morning, light, that also is representative of a part of a day, and then the evening comes back again. So a day in biblical calendar calculation always goes from evening to evening or sunset to sunset. We continue with our presentation. Here again, we could read all of these verses, but we just want to show you a very important point that we have discovered through education, that the verses, when we study them in the Bible, we have to recognize that they are universal divine actions. This particular study is for the first day of creation, where we have discovered that in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. This is a divine action. God created. The Spirit of God moved. God said, let there be light. God saw the light. God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. These are universal divine actions. But there are other points that we need to look at too, that in these simple words of the verse 1 of chapter 1 of Genesis, the first verse of the Bible, they are beautiful, beautiful, what we call universal laws. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Beginning is time. Heaven is space. Earth is matter. The science of time is astronomy. The science of space is physics or astrophysics. And the science of matter is chemistry. But in order to be able to explain these wonderful sciences and use them, we need the science of mathematics. So in 10 short words, we have here so many beautiful truths. If you calculate them, you will end up with 10 universal laws altogether. This is how the Word of God is written. And if you seek, you will find. This is a study that we have done. It is actually under True Education and the section movement of our website. If you look at it, it's the first section. And it will be showing you all of the day of creation, the days of creation from first day to sixth day, and the seventh day he rested. You may want to look at it to understand further, but for now we're staying with the first verse as we continue our research of the calendar. And we go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, where God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." So the Creator created the light, separated it from the darkness, and now He's assigning their function. They will be to divide the day from the night, those lights, and they're for signs, seasons, days, and years. Verse 16, God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So we have two great lights, one to rule the day, one to rule the night, and the stars. As we continue now, verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. Verse 18, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So we know from studying astronomy that the light for the day is the sun. The light for the night is the moon, which is a reflection of the sun, does not produce its own light. And the darkness also is taken away with the stars. So as we saw in this particular verse 14, that these were assigned for a very, very important purpose, and it has to do for dividing the day. This is the sun, and the night is the moon, and the signs are the stars. We also know, and we will see this, that the moon has been assigned for a purpose, and the sun. The moon is for seasons, and the sun is for days and years. As we pursue this study now, we will be looking at further of this wonderful truth in chapter 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. We like to believe that he rested his case, because this is the calendar, first time in the Bible that is mentioned, the 7th day, hebdomad, the group of 7. The 7 days hebdomad is the group of 7, which makes a week. Now we will go and look at a further part of the wonderful calendar of the Heavenly Father, and it's Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. You are looking at here at the first wonderful, wonderful synchronism and chronology of the Bible, which you need in order to understand the biblical calendar. Genesis chapter 7, verse 11 is actually the first synchronism and chronology of the Bible, which we present in Numbers 1317.org, right here in our website, and the file number 25, Research and Discovery on the Sanctuary, the Biblical Calendar, the True 7-Day Sabbath, the Feast, and the Day of Atonement of October 22nd, 1844. You need to study this specifically at the very end of the file, and you will find here what we call synchronism and chronology, and we attract your attention to specifically the chronology of Ezekiel. You can also study, of course, the explanation and all the other study we present under this particular file. And we have here the 14 days of synchronism and chronology that are presented in the book of Ezekiel, which is very unique because it's a book that contains the most synchronism and chronology of the Bible. So you may want to take time to go back to this wonderful study, which we present also in movement in different parts, and particularly here, the book of Ezekiel. So we attracted your attention to it because this is, again, in Genesis 7:11, the first synchronism, which is an event. In this case is the flood. Chronology is the date. For the first time in the Bible, you see the year, the month, and the day, which basically forms the biblical calendar. The biblical calendar has always a day, a month, and a year. So this is why we reproduce the calendar the same way when we do this study. Now, as we continue with Genesis chapter 8, verse 22, after the flood was stayed and after the earth was dry and Noah came out of the ark with his family, there is a wonderful promise in the sky with the bow. And we know that this is the promise. There will be no more flood like this all over the earth. But there is another promise that many people sometime have never seen perhaps, and it's the promise that while the earth remain, seed time, harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And this is to assure us that this biblical calendar that we are presenting here with this common and embolismic year will not change. It will not change as long as the earth remains. And even we have other wonderful promises that we can continue to follow here. Again, the promise of the moon that was appointed for season and the sun Noet is going down. This is another study that we have integrated in our biblical calendar. It's the moon cycle and the sun cycle. They work together to make up a year. 354 days, 365 days, astronomical numbers. For seasons in Hebrew, in the Hebrew Concordance, you will find the number 4150, 4150, which represent not only the 4 seasons, but also it means holy convocation, solemn assembly, appointed time, feast. So we're moving forward here with further studies, and it brings together this wonderful calendar. Again, another promise, Isaiah 66, verse 22, for as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, said the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. This is a beautiful promise of the Old Testament, which we find also in the book of Revelation, chapter 21:1, when John sees the new heaven and the new earth. So there is a promise of the new heaven and the new earth. Following with verse 23, what is wonderful is that it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, said the Lord. So here again, on the earth made new, we will have the new moon and a Sabbath to observe, to worship at. And this new moon again will be for seasons. It's the appointment to meet with the Lord. Wonderful, wonderful promise we cannot neglect as we're showing you beautiful truth about the biblical calendar. Another important truth about the biblical calendar is that the Lord has always promised that he will have 2 witnesses. The one witness is in the sky. This is the new moon horn crescent. This is the starter of the new month. And also on the earth, there is another witness, which is agriculture. And like the Heavenly Father chooses to do with his word, he hides those wonderful, wonderful truths among sometimes some very hard time. And here is plague number 7, the hail, found in Exodus chapter 9, verse 31. The flax and the barley was smitten. The barley was in the ear and the flax was bold, meaning they were ripened, they were ready. That's the season of barley presented here, the first grain in Israel to grow. And that represents when that plague happened, which would have been around March, April. And if it was ready, it would have been around the 2nd week of April, Gregorian reckoning, of course. But we know in biblical talk and biblical Hebrew talk, it is talking about the first month of the year, which was established actually in Exodus 12 by the Creator himself, telling Moses that from now on, you will start the new year at this time with the feast, and basically we continue with the fall feast after that. These are the spring feasts. Does it mean that Adam and Eve did not know that? Absolutely, they knew. But remember, Israel had been now in Egypt for 2 centuries at least, and they were prisoner there, and now they were being coming out of Egypt, and the Lord wanted to restore his feast to them and his Sabbath. So the crescent moon and the barley is what we have to look as witness. And in verse 32, it confirms another season that the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up, because the wheat and the rye grow about a month later and brings you even a little bit further, and it brings you when they're ready, and they are basically ripened to the feast of Pentecost. How do we know that? Is because we have studied in the book of Leviticus the wonderful feast of the Lord, starting in verse 2 of chapter 23. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts. And here it continues by talking about the Sabbath. It starts with number 3 with the 70 Sabbath, and continue with the feasts in their seasons, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruit, and then Pentecost a few months later. And then it passes to the fall feast with trumpet, atonement, and tabernacles. So this is what we discover in the Word of God, that we have beautiful quote that we can use to give a reason for the faith that is in us, specifically here in this case for the calendar, the biblical calendar. Many people also do not know that both chapter 28 and 29 of Numbers, you will find many more explanation of the wonderful calendar. And more specifically, it talks about the beginning of your month, which is the Sabbath, but it includes many, many information having to do with, more specifically, the sacrifices that were offered to the Lord on those specific days. And you will see, if you study carefully, that there were more sacrifices offered on the new moon than even on the 7th-day Sabbath. Not necessarily that the 7th-day Sabbath is not important, but it's because the new moon was very important and was observed by Israel for many, many centuries. So this is why we are repairing the breach, and restoring the old path to dwell in. Continuing with Leviticus chapter 25, verse 4, but in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard. These are statutes just the same as Leviticus 23. Statutes are meant to be obeyed and observed. And because of this, now the land is not producing, and the topsoil is all wasted for agriculture. We are also repairing that breach and restoring that breach, and restoring the path to dwell in agriculture by the grace of God. Verse 8, there is another wonderful feast, the 7th Sabbath of years in Leviticus 25. Thou shalt number 7 Sabbath of years unto thee. So we have the sabbatical year, and then we have here the 7th Sabbath of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7th Sabbath of years shall be unto thee 49 years. So what happened after 49 years of sabbatical years, 7 times? Then shall thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, in the day of atonement. Shall he make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. It is in the fall, because then the civil year starts. We have the spring feast. This is the part of the calendar that we explain in another study, where you have the religious part of the calendar, and the same calendar has a civil part, which has to do with the crowning of the king in the Hebrew time. It has to do with starting the Jubilee year, or the sabbatical year on the Day of Atonement. And they would go to war always, also more in the civil year, if they were to go and attack another country. So this is basically a short explanation of, again, another part of the biblical calendar that is very important. which brings us to the wonderful prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. As we enter now into our era, we also want to recommend these wonderful books from the website of Mrs. Ellen G. White's writing, which we believe they are inspired. And we recommend that you use Patriarch and Prophet. We're sorry, we lost the page here. Prophet and King. And we have here, we want to show them to you here. The Prophet, you can find them right here. You simply click like we just did, and you will find here, not in their order, but you go by alphabetical order. So you have the Act of the Apostle, you have Desire of Ages, you have the Great Controversy, and Patriarch and Prophet and King. So these are very, very important books we recommend. We call them the Conflict Series. We have 5 books we recommend: Patriarch and Prophet, Prophet and King, Desire of Ages, Act of the Apostle, and the Great Controversy. As we have showed you, of October 22nd, 1844, again, you have to come with us to 144,000 Teachers, and it's in the library here at 1844. And we recommend greatly that you study this because, again, this is where we got our knowledge of a common and embolismic year, which was a research that was reopened from the Millerites' writing in 1939, and which is here presented in 6-part series with the letter of conveyance and the 6 documents that you see here, large documents, which has given us our basis to study the biblical calendar in 2007, when, quite by accident, we actually bought this collection, and that we show you here in 1844, the 22nd of October. And this is the collection, the Grace Amadon collection, which basically we are presenting here the material that was used by the Millerites. These are at the time of the Millerites, not in 1939 when you search it carefully. These are very old manuscripts, and through this, they were able to obtain in the research of 1939, they were able to obtain enough information to put together a report. But unhappily, that report was put back into archives because, although it does not say that the 7-day Sabbath is not Saturday Gregorian reckoning, it does show it. And this collection was put into archives until we purchased part of it in 2007 by accident, and then later on it was shown on the internet by accident, but we believe with God there is no accident. And here again we have been able to create this website, Biblical Calendar Movement, which we invite you to join us in presenting this message to as many people as possible. And it's for 2020, 2030. And it's very important we let the whole world know about this calendar. And here is also another study that we have done on the dream of William Miller that expand the understanding, we believe, of the calendar, having to do with the small trunk that he saw in this dream, a key, and then another trunk after the first one was destroyed. We want you to take time to look at this beautiful dream because you will see that it corresponds to the research that the Millerite did until 1844, till their great disappointment, and they let go of that study. But as we mentioned, that wonderful study was reopened in 1939, in 1995, put back into the archive, and we believe that this is the study now that we hold in our hand of the big trunk, which we present to you. As we continue our presentation, we want to also show you 2 particular video that have already been prepared, and it's in the section movement in the menu of 144,000 Teachers, and it has to do with a study of the biblical calendar. And it's section number 5, Restoration Movement, the Sabbath and the Calendar, part 3. And this will bring you to this particular study that we recommend greatly, although you may have looked at it, but you need this understanding before you can understand the common and embolismic year. Now we have been able to determine this common and embolismic year. The first video is Standing on Trial for Your Belief, and the second one is Breaking the Code. And Standing on Trial for Your Belief gives you the exact norms to follow in order to assert the biblical calendar. Why? Because you might be having to answer for your faith in the court of law. Maybe not everyone, but many will be asked to give an answer for their faith, and you might lose your faith in the biblical calendar if you are not grounded in it. The biblical calendar that we present is luni-solar cycles based, barley harvest, new moon on crescent, with a common or embolismic intercalation, and sunset to sunset. And in this particular video, we give you many details of how to go about with the hebdomad, and then continuing with the sign, the season, the days, and the years, which we have presented through those wonderful quotes of the Bible of Genesis 1 and 2 and 7 and 8. And we bring you to also an explanation of the new moon, the new year, the spring feast. And all along we repeat the biblical calendar that we stand for: luni-solar, barley harvest, new moon on crescent, common or embolismic, sunset to sunset. And we finished with a test. And this test, we want, after you have listened to it, to see if you can pass it. And it's found right here on the slide 13 of this video, which you can do with the PDF, which is attached to the video on movement and the section we just showed you. Some of them are true, some of them are false. So you could say some are correct and some are not. So we do encourage you to go back to that video and the PDF and study carefully, as well as the completion of the biblical calendar, astronomy, and mathematics for 2020-2030. And we will not go through it all, but we want you to understand how to calculate the common and the embolismic year. Very, very important, again, based on the same premises of the biblical calendar that we have established in that other video that we recommend you greatly to study, Standing on Trial for Your Beliefs. So these are beautiful, beautiful videos that you may have missed. The specific of it is to establish the difference between the rabbinical Jew calendar and the calendar we use. The rabbinical Jew calendar no longer use the barley. They use the equinox. This is established in that study, but they also do not have an embolismic year anymore, which was the Hebrew calendar. And in order to establish if it is a common or an embolismic year, you need these particular data. You need to be able to establish from the moon phases and the fraction of the moon illuminated, when is the Passover observed. And depending when the Passover is observed, this is what established the year as common or embolismic. It sounds very complicated, but it is not. It is complex, but not complicated. And one of the rule of correspondence that we present is the fact that we have discovered that the moon phases calculation does not always correspond to the moon fraction illuminated for the new moon or black moon or conjunction or what is called astronomical new moon. An example of this, we choose this page because it's clearer, is the 2020 in this case, but it works for every year. In January 2020, the moon phases is on January 24th. However, the moon fraction is on January 25th at 0.00. Why is that? It's called actually an apparent discrepancy, which we choose to show you earlier in the other slides. It is because of a one point, very important rule, is the fact that we have discovered, and we have done it for 10 years just to make sure that it works, and we could do it for 100 years and it works all the time. It's called a rule of correspondence. We have discovered that when the black moon, conjunction, astronomical new moon, is on or after 11th hour, it will be in the moon fraction illuminated the day after. It will be actually seen the day after as the conjunction, which you cannot see with the naked eye, but you'll see no moon in the sky. So it's precise when you use a telescope, but it's also precise when you do the calculation. The Hebrew calendar was always calculated and observed. You cannot have it otherwise. You cannot only do the calculation or the observation. And this is why we have attempted here to show it to you. And we went back to another slides, but we show you very clearly the apparent discrepancy, but because the slide is a little bit bigger on the other one, that when it is on the 11th hour or after, the moon fraction illuminated, it's not a mistake. We have represented it in yellow and in gray. When it's in gray, the moon fraction and the moon phases corresponds. But when it's in yellow, you will see the moon fraction are always the day after. Why is it important? It is extremely important because it will make a difference between your horn crescent, which that's what we use for the beginning of the month, and it will make a difference to establish also the common and the embolismic year. And this is the purpose of that video. Nothing else. We're explaining to you the calendar in the Bible. We're explaining to you the calendar astronomically with the USNO, with Her Majesty Observatory, because we believe that we need to understand these facts before we pass to a more important approach now. This is very important. That's why we recommend those videos. But now we will show you in the library of 144,000 teachers, again, two sections that you need to pay attention to. The first section is the biblical calendar for 2020-2030, monthly in pamphlet format. And the second section is section number 6, the biblical calendar library for the moon phases calculation and the moon fractions observation, which we started with in showing you in USNO and Her Majesty Observatory. So as we pursue this, we want to show you a very important point having to do with a common and embolismic year. We will not show you the moon phases for this because we use the fraction of the moon illuminated to establish that fact. This is very, very important. This is what makes the difference between 1844, the 22nd of October for the Millerite, and 1844, the 23rd of September for the Rabbinical Jew, for the Day of Atonement. And this is creating a lot of problems for many people. If the Rabbinical Jew celebrated the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, on the 23rd of September in 1844, why do the Millerite came up with the 22nd of October? Could you demonstrate it? And most people cannot in 1844 to demonstrate this, but we can. Why? Because the common and embolismic year have been abandoned by the Rabbinical Jew under great persecution after the 325 AD, when the Roman government, along with the Roman Catholic Church, changed the calendar. It is a fact of history. This needs to be restored. This is the only way we can restore fully the biblical calendar. That's why there are so many calendars out there, but all of them cannot be right. We could all be wrong, but only one could be right while the other one are all wrong. And we believe the basis is common and embolismic. That's what makes a difference. In this case here, we will show you one or two of them and you will see the difference. So it's very simple. You need to read the numbers. And the numbers we read right now is 0.00. Again, we use the universal time, just like we showed you with HMO. And we will be doing it now with the conjunction, the black moon. And we will be doing it again based on these colors. So when you see January, February, May, July, September, October, December, you should know by now that this is because the fraction of the moon illuminated for the conjunction does not correspond to the phases of the moon. And yet with March, April, June, August, and November, it does correspond. It's the same date. So again, you know why? It's because it's on 11th hour or later, and it is not possible to assert it. So here we're going to go now to the month of March. This is how we do it. We determine the common and embolismic from the equinox. So the equinox is not bad. The equinox is astronomical. There is actually an astronomical equinox in March and another one in September. Equinox means equal days. And there is a solstice in June and in December. June solstice is the longest day of the year, and December solstice, usually around the 21st for all of those, is the shortest day of the year. So these are astronomical facts. They're not witchcraft. They're not astrological. They're astronomical. It's scientific. So we're going to use now the month of March 2020, which we have ascertained. This is us who wrote that on the data of USNO, and it's called editing, the same as the color. This is editing. You won't find that on USNO data. And basically, it was to make it more clear. So in order to ascertain if it's common or embolismic, you have to listen carefully and look at the numbers very carefully. And these are large enough, we believe, to be seen. So here we have on the 24th of March, 2020, a new moon conjunction for the 24th of March. So if you were to look at the moon phases, that would correspond with each other because it's in gray. Now, the 24th of March, 2020 would be the new moon, the conjunction. If you were to ascertain the visible crescent and the horn crescent, and you would end up with a full moon here at 1.00. This is why we give you those two numbers, which you need to know. 0.00 is always the conjunction, and 1.00 is always the full moon. We arrive then in April the 8th for the full moon. We chose not to indicate it on this particular graphic, but it's possible to ascertain it. Just look at it. And so this is the full moon. So in 2020, if you look at our calendar, we would have kept the Passover the day after the full moon and not on it, as per Aristobulus and Jiminy, which lived hundreds of years before Christ. And this is the way the Hebrew calendar was ascertained as well. The rabbinical Jew would ascertain the Passover always on the full moon. And they call it the 15th of the first month because they do observe it as the Passover supper, according to Exodus 12, which is from the 14th to the 15th. We ascertain the Passover according to the time that Christ had died on the 14th of Abib, according to Exodus 12, which was the lamb that is sacrificed. And Christ died at the 9th hour, according to the Gospels, and this was in the afternoon. That would have been the day after the full moon and not on it, according to Gethsemane. You can find that not only in the data of USNO, which we have for 31 AD, but you find it also in Desire of Ages in the chapter on Gethsemane, where it is mentioned clearly that the moon was full and broad in 31 AD in the Garden of Gethsemane after the Last Supper. So we know, according to history, according to the Bible, according to astronomy, that the Passover was always the day after, especially when you start with the horn crescent and not the first visible or the conjunction. This will all change the dates. People are wondering why we're so at odds with all the other calendar is because we follow those rules of correspondence. We have studied them, and we have studied 1844 the way the Millerite did it, which was guided by a gentleman that was a Jew, and Elder Frey, and he was also from the Karaites Jew, and he knew how to calculate the biblical calendar, which was the preservation of the calendar of the Hebrew. So here we have the 9th of April would be the Passover. Unleavened bread would be the 10th. And then you calculate 7 more days and you will end up with the next unleavened bread, the last one. So we go 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that would have been celebrated on the 16th, and we'll show you in some other slides how we also determine the Sabbath that way by calculating numbers by numbers, which we did for you for 10 years. So this is just to show you a simple, basic way to calculate the common year. Always go to March the 21st, which is the equinox. Check when the next conjunction is. If it is before, it's way too early. If it is after, it could be used to ascertain the Passover for that year. Usually it's later than the 21st though, because if you had 14 days, the Passover, according to the barley, because the barley has to be, the sheaf of barley was always waved before the Lord on first fruit, the 16th of Abib. So you need a sheaf of barley, and it cannot be green. It has to be ready. It has to be ripened, yellow, and it's woven before the Lord at first fruits. So if it's not ripened, it has to be postponed for 1 month. And this is called intercalation embolismic, where you had 1 more month. And in old time, it's called Adar, another Adar, which was the name for the 12th month at the time. And it brings you to an intercalation, a year that is called embolismic, just like we did for 2021. Looking now again, the same principle. We're looking at the equinox for the 21st of March 2021. We will scroll it down a little bit, again, based on universal time, USNO, Naval Observatory. So we want to look here at March the 21st, which brings us to here on the 21st of March. So that would be the equinox. And you see here the new moon based on the moon phases, the dark moon. The conjunction would have been on the 13th of March for 2021, which is way before the 21st. And the full moon would have been on the 29th of March, which is way too early to celebrate the Passover, because the Passover is always about the second week of April when the barley is ripened in Israel to this day. Remember, the harvest will stand until as long as the earth remains. So that has not changed. These rules of correspondence have not changed. They stand like the Heavenly Father stands in the heaven. So here we have a basis for embolismic now, because we have looked at the first, the 1.00 for the full moon, and we have looked first at the new moon, which is way before the 21st, the equinox. So now we have to find the next new moon conjunction, which in 2000, and we're looking at 21 right now, so would have been the 12th of April. So we will be using this conjunction to ascertain. Now we would look at the horn crescent, and then we go to the full moon, which is 1.00 on the 27th of April. We're going to go like this to show it to you precisely. And this is the full moon that we will be using to ascertain the Passover now, which is always the day after the full moon and not on it. So we would have kept it on the 28th of April. 28th of April is very late, it seems, for the month of April to keep the Passover, but you will see as you study further and further that you can go up to, the moon cycle can go up to the 5th of May Gregorian reckoning to have a Passover. You will have then a full moon on the 4th, and you could keep it on the 5th. According to the writing of the Millerite, they actually calculated the Passover as the 3rd of May, which made 1844 an embolismic year, which means that we will show it to you, the rabbinical Jew, which kept it on the earlier, 1 month earlier, they would have kept it in April like they always do. They even sometimes keep it in March for not keeping it the same as we do, because they do not observe a embolismic year anymore. They do not have an additional month, a 12th month of Adar. They do not do that anymore because of the persecution of the Catholic Church and the Roman government starting in 325 AD. All right, so this would bring us then to this is the Passover. So if you calculate the first unleavened bread, and this is 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that would be the last day of unleavened bread. It is late according to the Gregorian calendar, but it is not late according to the cycle of the moon, which that's what we follow at 144,000 teachers, making it then an embolismic year, because it is late. But it is not too late for the cycle of the moon, and that's why we determined 2021 as embolismic. You may have to listen to this presentation for 220, 221, and then attempt to do it why we come up with now 22 with a common year. 22, as you look at it, is a common year, and you will follow through with until 2030 and see if you are able. We recommend you use this particular slide here or this particular pages because it's easier. As we pass now to the next slide, we will show you, or the next, this is actually a video as well in a PDF, where we have done, in the PDF, we have done all of the years 2020 to 2030, again using the moon fraction eliminated because it's the one that we can find the biblical calendar complete. And again, we have to ascertain first in 2020, as we have done earlier in that other slide. We want to show you here that we have done exactly the same. We have ascertained the conjunction, the black moon with the moon phases, same thing as we done earlier. But this time we have added the Sabbath in blue. We have added here this is the horn crescent, and then the day that it's celebrated. The way you can follow through with this one is you got to look at our color here that we have exactly here, the color description. It's called a legend, but we have red. We have for the new moon horn crescent, those are colors we have chosen. We have the 70 Sabbath and the feast that are always at the same time. We have the 7-day Sabbath and horn crescent. These are the feasts, the holy day convocation, which you can do secular work on, like Passover, for example, first fruits. You can do work on those two feasts, but they're holy days, but they're feasts that you can do secular work. And the holy days where you keep it as a Sabbath, but they are not necessarily a 7-day Sabbath, like Pentecost, for example. And so you will see that is very important. Atonement is also a 7-day Sabbath, holy days, but it doesn't fall on the 10th on the 7-day Sabbath. So these are very, very important colors to follow in order to understand this graphic. And again, the common year and the embolismic year is shown. You will observe as we go slow, please pay attention to the common and embolismic. You can never have two embolismic year in a row, although you can have two common year in a row. We do not establish that. As you can see, we simply read the numbers, the cycle of the moon, and that's how it comes to pass. So here we have 2 for 22, 23 common year. Then you will definitely have for 24 an embolismic year. How do we know? Because we have done it so many times now, we know that never the cycle of the moon has two embolismic in a row. Why common and embolismic? It's easy. The moon cycle is 354 days. The sun cycle, which we determine as being important to ascertain the year as well, has 365 days. 365 minus 354 is 11 days. So after 2-3 years, the moon is about a month behind the sun in cycle. So you have to see it through with the common and embolismic year. And that's why every 2 to 3 years, you will have an embolismic year with 1 month more, and it catch up with the sun then. This is a very intelligent being who came up with that, with a calendar in the sky. First of all, with the sun, the moon, and the stars, which you know from the Mazzaroth. If you have studied the Mazzaroth in our website, 144,000 teachers, specifically in the movement, and we present it under the second coming, that the Mazzaroth also presents that it has definitely some cycles of the moon. So you can see, if we go back at it again quickly, we have a common year to finish our cycle to 2030. We stopped there. We could have done further, but for 10 years, within 10 years, we're hoping Jesus will come. But this is not the attempt that we're doing with those calendars. It's simply to give you the biblical calendar. So you can see 28 will be common because it's future, it's not done yet. And when you look at the 27 is common, so 2 common years. We should have here then for 226 a embolismic year. So we can see without even looking at it, because we have calculated that and we know the cycle of the moon now. This is a common. You cannot get 2 embolismic in a row. This could be now for 24 either an embolismic or a common. This is embolismic. That can happen. Embolismic, common, embolismic. Embolismic, common, common, embolismic. That's the pattern. So here we have common. And now we're going to have another common. That's 2 in a row. That's possible. And then we have now an embolismic again for 21. So basically, you will learn that by reading the calendar. Just learn to read those data and observe them carefully, and until you have it appropriated, make it yours, you will see why it's embolismic. Is because the full moon, for when you look at March, the full moon would have been right here on the 29, which is too early for the barley. But the Jew in this case have kept that date for 221. We checked it out. And we went to the next one conjunction and we kept the feast according to the Hebrew calendar. Very late it seems, but not too late according to the moon. Now, again, we repeat, you can find this in this wonderful section 5, all of the calendar 2020, 2030. And as we have shown now, we will not repeat. We have shown that you can use the pamphlet, or you can use what we call here the monthly. That's what we have shown here. You have the monthly and the pamphlet, but the monthly is easier to read. It's exactly like a calendar. You can print it. You can have it on the wall if you like. And we've carrying it through here to the little pamphlet, which is very practical. This is for 2023. And of course, we start with February 2023 here you can see, and we always start with November 2022. All our calendar starts in November because of our fiscal year for way of life, and we believe also it's to go away from January Gregorian reckoning. So this way, after the feasts are over for the fall, we start the civil calendar and we bring you all the way to the biblical calendar and finish again with the civil calendar. So we finish here with the feast, and then it will start the next one. This is the last month of we call it the religious calendar, and then we start again with the civil calendar. All right, so basically this is what we wanted to show you, but we have one more detail to show you from the library if you follow us carefully, and it has to do with 1844, which we have showed you our page on the biblical calendar, which is the 144,000 in the section of the library. We have showed you this wonderful page here, and you would want to go back to it often, of the Grace Amadon collection, as we call it here. We prefer to call it the position of October 22nd, 1844. So this is directly related to what we're going to show you now, which is having to do with the computation of 1844, which we have done for you. And you can go back at it. And again, 1844 was not a common year. It was an embolismic year. And we show it again here, same method, using the USNO observatory. This is universal time. This is what the Millerites would have used. And in 1844, if you go to history, you will find out that USNO observatory existed already. So they would have used, and it says that in the collection, that they were using the data of the USNO and the almanac in order to establish that date, with Elder Frey, the 22nd of October, 1844, which was a Jewish Karaite. These Karaites have confronted the rabbinical Jews for centuries for having changed the biblical calendar from the barley to the equinox. And again, we did our homework for 1844, and we are determining that in March of 1844, the moon phases and the fraction of the moon illuminated would have been the same. So as we pursue it to April of 1844, we have seen that it was an embolismic year by using the data of 1844, which they probably may not have had in 1844, but they have built them now for us, which is great. This is 1843. We bring you here to show you the last month, and then we transfer now to 1844. You can get 1700 years of data from USNL. You can go back 1700 years, which is magnificent, and then forward as well. So 1844 was an embolismic year. We wrote the embolismic year there. We edited it. Universal time we have used to do this presentation. Again, we will do the test. Month of March, equinox, the 21st, would have been here. If you look at it, the conjunction would have been the 19, and we would have looked here. We have marked here our horn crescent, which the Millerite in their writing actually writes these numbers. So that's why we are able to see them. Then they would have passed this 1.00, which is the full moon in April the 3rd, which they determined was too early for the barley to be ripened. The barley cannot be ripened until the second week of April. So they followed through with it. They went down to the next new moon conjunction, which would have been the 18th of April. The horn crescent would have been on the 20th. They would have seen it, they would have observed it if they did observe the new moon, which they did not. And the Sabbath would have been the 19th of April, the 70th Sabbath for that particular month, and before that. And then they would have passed on exactly like what they wrote in their writing. They would have gone to the month of May, and they would have calculated it as the evening of the 3rd of May, celebrating Passover on the 4th like we do. Not the day of the full moon, the day after, as Aristobulus and Gemini says, the unleavened bread, first fruits, and then that would have bring them all the way to the month of October, the 7th month for the Day of Atonement. And to calculate it is simple. They determine in their writing, and we can see it on the data of the moon phases, that in October 1844, the conjunction would have been on the 12th, which they write in their writing. And you can find that in our page on 1844 in the 6-part series. And that's what the USNO also shows. And then they would have determined that the trumpets would have been on the horn crescent, which was the 14th. That's exactly what they calculated it, the 13th to the 14th. And then they calculated, according to Elder Frey, with his help, that the Day of Atonement would have been on the 22nd in the evening. The full moon, the new moon would have been right here. If you look at it, this is when they were expecting Christ, not the new moon. It had to do actually simply to the 22nd because they calculated it for the Day of Atonement. So the new moon, this is the conjunction. This is the horn crescent. This is when they call it the trumpet, though they didn't celebrate it. And then 10 days later, from that date, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they would have celebrated it from the sunset to sunset of the 22nd to the 23rd. But they were expecting Christ at that sunset of the 22nd. So basically, this is showing us that they were correct. We're following the same rules of correspondence. The 22nd in the evening, if you read their writing, they were ready to wait for Christ's second coming. The disappointment was caused not because of the calculation. The calculation was right. The disappointment was caused because they expected Christ to come on the earth according to Daniel 8 and Daniel 9 calculation of the 2300 days, but Christ entered the most holy place to start the day of judgment. So please continue to study as these things are so, and you will not be taken away by false teaching, by other calendars, except the one based on the platform of 1844. Go at it more than once. We did it many, many times in order to obtain these calculations. And then we give you a lot of explanation here, much more, on the purpose of this research. And we encourage you to, again, breaking the code. Computation of October 22nd is based on the same as what we have showed you regarding those two videos. If you bypass those two videos, you will not understand our explanation at all. In the court of law, you will not be able to use this material reading it. You will have to explain it. But you will be allowed to use this material, which is for you to copy and keep, in order to give it to the court and to give it to whosoever will question you, so that you can demonstrate your evidence, and they will question you, believe me, and it will be also with a lot of interruption. You will not have 2 hours to speak in a row without interruption. But it's encouraging because we also have the promise of Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, that we should not add unto the word which the Lord has commanded us, neither shall we diminish from it, that we may keep the commandments of the Lord our God, which he has commanded us. And this wonderful truth is repeated in Revelation 22nd with the same acknowledgement, chapter 22nd, verse 18, that we are not to basically add to the word of God. If any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in these books. And again, continuation, if any man shall take away from this word of the book of prophecy, which is a prophecy, the calendar, God shall take away his part out of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. May the Lord bless you as you study diligently to give an answer for the reason of the faith that is in you with fear and trembling. May the Lord bless you.